I'm Brent Maddock, and I'm co-writer and co-producer of Tremors.
Did you always want to tell stories when you were a young lad, from an early age?
Yeah, I realized well into my middle years, it suddenly hit me one day that when you're trying to figure out why you're doing what you're doing in your life, how you ended up there, and it just hit me. One of the things I did as a kid was I did puppet shows in the neighborhood for kids' birthday parties. I had a little suitcase with my hand puppets in it, not marionettes, hand puppets, so I could have two characters at once interacting, and a little stage I made. And I think I charged as much as $5 to entertain the kids. And I realized, yeah, I mean, there was something in me that wanted to show off, be funny, and tell stories. So there it was, and then it sort of lay dormant until somewhere in high school, as movie cameras changed from 8mm to Super 8mm, and my dad suddenly went from the wind-up Kodak 8mm to the battery-powered, to the battery-powered Super 8, I ran off with this 8mm camera and started making movies, just figuring out, shooting in the order of the story, the way you all start out, and made movies, usually with my little brothers being forced to play various characters, things like that. And then by the time I went away to university, I was grabbing anybody's 16mm camera they had and making up movies and shooting those with my friends.
And what were the movies about?
Well, those were just comedies. They all had a comedic thing, you know, and one was a girl brings her new boyfriend home to meet dad, and they have dinner. Now, there's no sound. This is 16mm without sound. So it's all hugely visual and overacted. And basically, it's sort of a short, Chaplin-like, Keaton-like little comedy short. That would be one. And, you know, I did a few more. I started realizing that I could get various professors to give me credit for making a movie in place of writing a paper. So I did a number of those to get through college. And when I graduated from undergraduate school, I was having an English degree. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life, even though I had a bachelor's degree in English, and so decided to apply to film school for grad school, and that's what I did, and came out to LA for that.
I want to ask you, who were your biggest influences when you were growing up, the kind of movies that you were watching?
Well, I think pretty much what everybody was watching and loving and all that stuff. Obviously, Westerns, you know, cowboy movies, that was a big influence. I loved cartoons, like every kid. You know, I just absolutely loved cartoons. I feel a little bit ashamed. I think back to when I was 3 and 4 and 5. Even at that age, you're such an easy audience. You loved even really bad stuff that just wasn't funny, but it made you laugh. And so, yeah, cartoons. Rather quickly realized that the Looney Tunes were, for me, the best. Those were the funniest. And so I love those particularly. And when Steve and I were roommates while we were at film school, and for a few years after film school, in this pathetic apartment in Hollywood, it was so sad. We made sure, this was before video, before VCRs, when everything was either, if you didn't see it, you saw it again. And we would schedule, I don't know what night it was like Tuesday night or something, there would be a half hour of Looney Tunes on TV. And we'd both arrive as if to class, sit down on the sofa with our spiral notebooks, because we're gonna watch these Looney Tunes, and we had to write down who directed it, who wrote it, and the information we needed, and a brief description of the story, so we could, and the title, so we could remember it, because you couldn't just go back and look at it. It was going by in real time. So we studied Looney Tunes really for about a year. It was so funny. We'd watch Looney Tunes as though we were in like Looney Tunes 101. But we'd always loved that stuff. So, and we later ended up, to our amazement, working for Chuck Jones for a while. So that was just astonishing for us to do that. But yeah, those were a big influence. And, you know, the usual crap I think kids find funny. I don't know that anything was, I didn't begin to appreciate the silent comics until I was in grad school. Then I started to realize what geniuses some of them were. That was a big influence as well. Keaton especially, Chaplin of course, but I think Keaton, he's more modern, more relatable than Chaplin is. So that was a big influence. Then you throw in Monty Python, and you're done. That's a lot.
What's your favorite Monty Python sketch?
Well, probably the parrot, you know. But I love the one when the Haggy wives in the laundromat decide to go to Paris to find Jean-Paul Sartre, ask him a philosophical question. It's just so brilliant. It's just so great, you know. But that was a big influence, and it just came at the right age too, because we were seeing them anew about 6 or 7 years after they were actually made. So we were the right age, you know, grad school brats, watching this stuff, really intelligent comedy. But there was the same, not the same, but an equal level of sophistication and intelligence in the Looney Tunes, really. And when you meet Chuck Jones, you understand why. He was quite a brilliant guy. I liked his cartoons especially. So all of that was, you know, thrown in the hopper and bubbling away, you know. And you're going, well, great, what do you do with it? You got to do something with it. So we attempted for a long time to use it.
That's really interesting, because like, when I asked Steve that question, he said, he talked about Ray Harryhausen. And,
yes, well, Steve and I grew up very differently. What's interesting about our partnership was that it's really yin and yang. It's like we're the opposites. We're just the opposites. But we get along really well. We enjoy each other's company. But Steve can walk into a room with 100 people and not talk to any of them, you know. And my wife has to come and get me and pull me out of the room because I'm talking to everybody, you know. It's that way. Steve grew up very with a father and mother who kept moving. I think he lived in 12 different states. 10 different states or whatever it was, before he went away to college. He was the only white kid on the North Shore of Maui in 1960, the only white kid in that school, you know? And so he developed a life where he would sit in his backyard and play by himself. And he came up, once he saw these monster movies, Ray Harryhausen, et cetera, he began to realize, oh, he can do his own versions of those, and took that very, very seriously. But he was very much that way. This is why he lives in the desert with his wife, you know, and you know, he's perfectly happy with his own company and doing his own thing. I'm the opposite. So, but those were, yeah, monster movies were his influence. In fact, when we started film school, and I met Steve and a few other friends who were also monster movie fans. And they would talk in a language I didn't understand. I didn't know who Ray Harryhausen was. And they would talk about Vincent Price in this movie and these wonderful films, these Hammer films and all. And they were just really, really into it. And to me, it was all new. I never watched those movies. They were fine. I didn't have anything against a scary movie. But they were not my big influence. My big influence was more comedy, physical, probably more physical comedy than even verbal comedy. So, yeah, not that Steve doesn't appreciate comedy, because he's really, really into it as well, and understands a lot about it. But so those were the two things.
So that kind of explains why Tremors is comedic and horror at the same time, because it's a direct reflection of both of your personality.
Yeah, it's yeah, that's probably pretty close to what it is. There was a when the idea, I mean, you've heard the story of how really Steve came up with the idea for the movie, and that little scrap of paper That was, and we started, obviously, as a writer, you're going, what do we need? We need people isolated so that they can't call the police and get help because there's no story, you know. We need a group of people because some of them will have to die. It's like those people in Star Trek. You know that guy's going to die because you've never seen him before. But you needed that. There's certain things you needed. And when we so we came up with this little town in the desert, this town that gets isolated. And but the question then is, well, what is it? Is it a drama? Is it a tragedy? Is it a comedy? Well, do we want it to be scary? And you have to constantly remind yourself of those, ask yourself those questions. So what we did, we wrote a number of drafts of this. And we had, I think, an important moment, which was looking at the script and going, it's pretty funny. There's some really funny gags, some funny stuff. And we wondered, is that going to make you take the creatures less seriously? Are they going to be less of a scare? Because nobody's taking them really seriously. And we thought, yes, probably. We're not going to take that chance. So we went through and did something that we rarely do with the script. We made it less funny and took out a lot of jokes and a lot of sequences that would have been wonderful visually, but would have been, you would have enjoyed them in a comedic way. So we made it more serious. So it's a weird balance, and often you can't get the balance is it's a tricky thing, and we wanted the jokes to come out of the frights and the scares. We didn't want anybody acting like these big worms are something to laugh at, and I think we struck, for that at least, we struck the right balance.
So can you just tell me again the story of how you first met Steve and Ron?
Well, I drove out to LA to go to USC film school as a grad student, and Steve had done the same. He'd gotten out of the Army after 2 years in the Army, and then came out to LA, and we both started in the middle of the year, so we were starting in the same semester. And I went over to the film school, which at the time, as famous as it was this ramshackle old building, which was at one time the ROTC stables for their horses or something. It really looked like it. Although it was charming, it was perfect, it's all you needed. Now it's its own giant city. You go to USC Film School, you just can't believe what they've got. But then it was very simple. And I wandered over to see what it looked like and walked into the courtyard. And there's this guy sitting there with this big old briefcase. And I went over and introduced myself, and it was Steve. It was like I just drove to LA, walked in and met my writing partner. It was just like, I thought, well, if I'd known that, it's like, all right, I don't need to go to film school. We'll just start working. But, and we hit it off really well, you know, even though he's mostly a monster movie guy and all that stuff, but we found enough in common. And we eventually, and then I was in some of his student films. You know, we helped each other out with our, you know, the films they assigned us to make that first semester. And we started working together more and more, then eventually became roommates and continued it throughout grad school and afterwards as well.
And when you both sat down to write Tremors, how does it work when you're co-writing with somebody else? Can you sort of paint a picture of that process? Is there somebody at the typewriter, somebody pacing around, or were you in separate rooms, separate? It's well, it can be anything. We and everybody's of course different. There was the funny story, Billy Wilder working with Raymond Chandler on Double Indemnity. They couldn't stand each other, and they're in the same office. And Raymond Chandler, of course, when he worked, smoked a pipe. So Billy Wilder made him sit in the bathroom with the door shut, and they would shout at each other through the bathroom door. It was just great, you know, because they wrote a great movie, so it's worth all the pain and suffering. But when we started out, when Steve was still in LA before he went off to Arizona, we would sit in the same room all day together, and he tended to write stuff down because he can touch type, something I cannot do. I have to look at the keys, and I go very slowly. So he would write everything down, and we would just talk. We would talk. And there's, you know, various phases. One thing is you're just throwing stuff around, throwing ideas around, searching for anything that will stick to anything else. And And then you begin outlining, and we always outline laboriously before we start to actually write the script. We think it's a waste of time to be writing scenes when you don't know where you're going. Although other writers say you should do that. So everybody has a different approach. But yeah, we would sit there and talk and then work out an outline in order, page after page. Oh, well, let's move this here. Oh, that's no good. We don't need that. But what if he did this instead of that? And that goes on forever until you feel like, oh, we've got an outline for a movie. And then we can start talking about, well, then you can really start to write the scenes, interior, wherever, day, so-and-so walks in the room and slips on the sofa, over the sofa and falls down and whatever, then you're writing scenes. But at least you know you need them. They're part of the story. So that's how we would do it. We did it pretty harmoniously. A lot of writers get really frustrated with each other, and it's hard because it's a difficult thing to be presenting ideas constantly that then you have to defend them and fight for them. It's easier to write on your own. You don't have to defend them. It's your idea, you put it in. It's more fun, I suppose. But if you're working with somebody who can challenge your thinking, you actually end up saving a lot of time. You just don't go down blind alleys, spend 3 weeks on taking the story in this direction when you realize, oh, it doesn't work. What a waste of time. You want a partner, go, whoa, don't even go there. Because this is okay, I see where that's going. That's leading nowhere. So that's really, really good.
And were you quite sort of disciplined when you were writing, or was there a lot of mucking around and then looking at magazines?
I like to think we were pretty disciplined. I don't know. It's so easy to get distracted. But no, I think we work pretty hard. And in a way, it's easier to screw around when you have somebody to joke around with. But it's also harder because you have to be there on time, can't wander in a half hour late, and if they want to work, well, then you want to work. You don't want to let them down. So I think that was helpful,
In the script for Tremors, did you originate or have any thoughts in mind about the origins or the backstories of the graboids?
Well, that was a running question. We felt obligated to address that question. I mean, I don't like movies or anything that doesn't address the obvious question. And because you would never let anybody in a conversation walk away without you grabbing them and saying, yeah, but what about the whatever? But we had no explanation other than, where did they come from? How do you explain this? So with rudimentary understanding of the Pleistocene era or whatever, we didn't know anything really. We looked up a few things. Let's address it. Let's come up with some theories, as the guys do on The Rock at that point. I think, and get as close to a believable theory as we can. But leave it that we don't know, folks. We don't know, but it could be this. We thought that would be enough for the fans. I think it is, I don't know. But otherwise, you're saying, oh, now we know how these impossible things could be alive. Well, then it's a lie. So let's say it's probably this, but we don't know. So at least we've addressed it.
And, you just made a huge amount of success with Short Circuit. So I guess when it came to Tremors, getting Tremors made was a walk in the park.
Getting a studio to want to do it. Wow. I don't remember it being terribly horrible, but I don't remember it being easy either. What we wanted to do was this. We had written, after we sold Short Circuit, we'd written a number of movies, all of them that got made, which is highly unusual. We were told over and over by our agent. And we went, well, why wouldn't they make them? We wrote a good script, why wouldn't they make it? This never happens. I know people now, friends of mine, have been screenwriters for 20 or 30 years. They've never had a movie made. They've got paid every now and then, but they've never had a movie made. And I think, what a system, But we'd done Short Circuit, that did well. and we've written a number of other movies that were made. And every film, though, because we were filmmakers before this, we'd made a lot of movies, shorts. And not that they were all brilliant, but some of them were pretty good. And a lot of screenwriters don't, well, they've never made films. They don't understand that process. They don't know how things are done. But we did, and we would look at the films that were made. There was usually something or a number of some things about these films that really bothered us. That were just, the tone was wrong, or the absolute wrong actor was cast in the lead, or the music was insufferably off, or you name it. They've done it, those directors. And you just think the amount of money they paid you is not enough to make you not want to kill yourself. Because here's this movie that will live forever, right? And your name's on it, and it's all wrong, or it doesn't represent you. So our agent, Nancy Roberts, got tired of hearing us complain. She said, you have to write a script on spec, the way you wrote Short Circuit, turn down some jobs, which we did, a lot of big jobs that were going to pay us big money, say, no thanks, we're going to go off and write our own movie. And just so we owned it, and we could then take it to studios and see if they wanted to buy it and make it, we wanted to produce it. And we wanted our friend Ron, who'd never done a theatrical feature film before, although who was a good filmmaker, to direct it. So first-time director. That made it difficult, but we finally, Universal, Tom Pollock at Universal, who was the head of production, finally went for the idea. And I think they did something in the contract where if Ron was a screw up, they could fire him after the first week or something like that and put somebody else in there. Well, that wasn't the case. So.
Yeah, he said that earlier. He said he was just, I've got to get through the first 2 weeks. I've got to get through
the 2 weeks, yeah. It's so. They did send up the guy from Universal to snoop around. He wasn't snooping, he was a nice guy. Art Brewer, really good guy. He was one of those film guys, knows everything about film production. The Teamster's screwing you, or somebody's doing something wrong, you're raking off some money, and why are you parking the vehicles there? It's a longer walk to the set. You're losing 10 minutes of sunlight a day. You know, great guy. So he came up, and I noticed him kind of not sneaking around, but I didn't know who the guy was. And he's looking around, and we're shooting in the middle of the desert, and which Ron and Steve and I had done for 10 years prior to that, doing educational films and stuff. So it was going, it was working. And so he finally said to us, you guys are fine, don't worry, I'm going back to LA. So we were off the hook. That was nice. But yeah, they were understandably worried. You don't send a first-time director out without making sure that, you know, he knows what he's doing, because it's a lot of pressure, so.
And that was Gail Hurd's role, wasn't it?
Yeah, Gail was put on there as executive producer to make sure everything went well. And so that was great. That really took pressure off us, because she was sort of protecting us from whatever might have flown our way.
Just going back to Nancy, can you just, you know, tell us who Nancy Roberts was and what her role was in the genesis of Tremors?
Nancy Roberts was our agent. She was the agent that we got our first screenplay to, which was Short Circuit. We showed it to, I think, we got it to 3 agents. Not easy to do when you don't have a track record as a writer. It's very hard to get agents to even look at your stuff. But we got it in there through a recommendation from a writing teacher I was taking a writing course from. And so we got the script to these 3 agents. Nancy was the one who read it the first, called up and said, let's meet. We went and met her at her little office in Beverly Hills. And she had read the script really well. She really understood it. It was clear it wasn't like she hadn't just scanned it, or an assistant read it and gave her a one-page synopsis. She was into it. And I liked that. We liked that. She was thorough. She was good. She was, you know, talked about how to market the script. You want to sell it. So I'm talking about Short Circuit here. and all of that, and it worked out beautifully. So we just stayed with her, and she was our agent for a long, long time, eventually becoming a producer with us on future projects. And so she was the one who recommended that we write Tremors as a spec script and sell it that way with ourselves attached as producers, so we would stop complaining about people ruining our movie. So that's what we ended up doing with Universal. We set it up with them for a modest budget, but and it worked out fine. I mean, we complain about everything, even things in Tremors, but it's pretty much the film we stand behind and say this pretty much represents what we were thinking. It's hard to say that of most, from a writer's point of view, because there's so many changes always made. Sometimes they're much better, and the writers are angry because they're not really, they've lost their objectivity. And sometimes it's not very good, and it's too many compromises or too many mistakes or bad taste or whatever it is, and that's pretty heartbreaking to a writer.
And Gail Ann Hurd, can you tell us what her role was in the movie?
Well, I don't exactly know. Gail was brought on as executive producer to oversee it, to sort of really to guarantee it, because she'd done so many successful films. And I don't know how she got involved, but it was really helpful, because they knew if we were, screw-ups in the desert, Gail would make sure we got the thing shot and finished on time and on budget and all that. And she was helpful. There's a couple of moments in the production where she was really, really helpful, really helped us out with the right advice at the right time. So that was good. That was nice. It's nice to have somebody who's got your back,
Who came up with the name Graboid?
We looked up in the dictionary or thesaurus anything related to worm, and there was a prefix of grab and a variety of words that had something to do with worms. And I like grab, and so then oid is just perfect, oid, because it sounds sci-fi and just cheesy enough. And then Walter Chang, the Victor Wong character, who was wacky in his own right, was just the perfect guy to come in with graboid, and it was just funny. It was just off at center enough, but pseudoscientific enough that it seemed to work. So that's how we came up with graboid. The dictionary, very important.
And what did you envisage they would look like when you were writing them?
Well, I think obviously they were long and cylindrical and had to move through the dirt. So we kind of knew that. And we knew that they have big mouths with teeth or whatever. So generally that. But then, you go to, Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff, and you tell them what you want, and then what they come back with is this stunning stuff that gives you what you want, but it looks like it's a real thing. That was just amazingly fun. And you tweak it and all of that stuff, but it was, they made it seem believable. Because it can get very easily comedic, especially that concept. You just don't want people laughing. Just